For day 16 notes, example 1a says the area of a rectangle is given by a trinomial, x squared minus 2x minus 35. What are the possible dimensions of the rectangle? Use factoring to solve. So if you have a rectangle, we know to find the area you would do your length times your width. And currently all we know is the area of this rectangle. So we use factoring to find the dimensions of the length and the width. So 1 times negative 35 is negative 35. And we're trying to get to negative 2. If you look at your factor sheet, at 35, we have 1 times 35 and 5 times 7. So which one of these could make a negative 2? 5 and 7. Now, when we first started talking about factoring, I told you guys that if you have a small number first and then your big number second, that this part of the x factor has to match signs. So I need to have a negative here. And then I check the math. 5 minus 7 is negative 2, and if I multiply I get negative 35. So my possible dimensions is basically just writing this in factored form. X plus 5 and x minus 7. Part B is pretty much set up the exact same way. So in part B, I look to see, okay, how would I factor this? I would go with 1 times 40 is 40. And my goal is to get to negative 14. So the factors of 40 are 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 4 and 10, 5 and 8. So I look to see, okay, which one could I add or subtract and get to negative 14? Has to be 4 and 10. And I'd have to add those to get a 14, but I see that it's a negative. So I need to make them both negative. Check. These match their signs. And a negative times a negative makes a positive 40. So we have x minus 4 and x minus 10. Okay, and then the last example, example 2, it says the area of a rectangle is 2x squared minus 13x minus 7. What are the possible dimensions of the rectangle? Use factoring. So even though this is the exact same type of problem, you're going to have to factor. The only difference is that this number is bigger than 1. And when this is bigger than 1, you have to do x factor with bottoms up. So up here, since these had a 1 in front of x squared, these were just normal x factor. So to do bottoms up, we're going to go ahead and multiply the first number times the last number. So that gives us negative 14. And we're still going to try to get to the middle number, negative 13. So the factors of 14 are 1 and 14, 2 and 7. So we look to see, okay, which one can make a 13 or a negative 13? Well, 14 minus 1 makes 13. But I have to have the same sign as this negative. So the 14 has to be negative. 1 minus 14 is negative 13. And if I multiply, I get negative 14. So let's write our factors out. All right, then we're going to divide by this 2, because it's the first number. This is our bottoms up part. And 1/2, that cannot divide evenly. It cannot reduce. So I need to bring my bottom number up. So 2x plus 1. Here, if I divide, I get a 7. So this 14 over 2 gets replaced with a 7. X minus 7.